Welcome to the Adventure Story Podcast. First, let me take 20 seconds to tell you about my new book. What if we've been looking for Atlantis in the wrong place? When an archaeologist dies protecting an impossible secret, her final message sends Eden Black racing into the Sahara to find an ancient crystal encoded with the knowledge of a lost civilization. It's the power that once turned a paradise into a wasteland. From high-speed chases through Marrakesh to an underground chamber older than recorded history, Eden must face a rogue scientist determined to use the crystal to reshape the world. Last time it awakened, the Sahara was born. This time, it could end everything. The Sahara event is the 7th in my Eden Black archaeological thriller series. Search for the Sahara event by me, Luke Richardson, wherever you get your adventures. Right, let's get on with the episode. It's 1919 and Cairo, Egypt stands at a crossroads. The Great War is over, but its scars remain. The streets pulse with revolution as Egyptian nationalists rise against British rule, while in the shadows, spies, treasure hunters and smugglers fight their own secret battles. Ancient relics disappear into the black market, rumours swirl of lost tombs yet to be uncovered, and a city once ruled by pharaohs is now a chessboard for empires. Hey, I'm Luke. I'm an author of archaeological adventure novels. I travel the world looking for stories to put into my books and to share with you right here on the Adventure Story Podcast. Today, Sean McLachlan's guiding us through that mysterious world. An archaeologist and an award-winning author, we're going to wander the back streets of Cairo in 1919 to find out why it's the ultimate setting for intrigue, for adventure, and for danger. And let me tell you this, the pyramids are just the start. Sean, thank you for joining me.
Hi, Luke. Thank you for having me.
It's great to be able to talk to you. I've visited Cairo and I know you spend several months a year there, but how is it different today when we walk around that city to what it would have been like in 1919?
Well, that's interesting because in some ways it's completely different. In other ways, it's very much the same. Now, of course, in 1919, there were cars on the streets, but now there's flyovers and concrete everywhere, and Cairo traffic is crazy. I don't think anyone has ever died of a car crash in Cairo because the cars never move fast enough for it to be fatal. Every car is dented and scraped up and scratched. But a lot of the old historical buildings remain. And if you go into the old part of town, which is commonly referred to as Islamic Cairo, although of course it's all Islamic, it's like you're stepping back in time. You'll pass all of these old madrasas and these mosques dating back 1,000 years sometimes. These old fountains, brilliantly carved fountains, public fountains that rich Ottomans or Mamluks made for the neighborhood. And the markets are still wonderfully full of old brass lanterns and the smell of spices. And then, of course, a bunch of cheap Chinese imports. So it's a little mix of everything.
It's so evocative of what you've said because I'm imagining there what it's like and what my experience was. And what you said about the cars is so true. You know, crossing the road is a real challenge.
Yeah. Basically what you have to do to cross the road, because there are stoplights and everything, but those are only casually observed. You basically just have to walk out making eye contact with each driver in turn. And don't start and stop, don't jerk, don't panic. Because if you just go on a proper steady vector, they'll calculate and they'll miss you.
It's scary, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
So Egypt is quite common in adventure stories. A lot of people write adventure stories about Egypt. Mostly, though, they sort of descend from or focus on, in some way, ancient Egypt, you know, pharaohs and the like. But what makes 1919 or Cairo in that era stand out as a good setting for an adventure story?
I first went to Egypt in 1991 for the same reason everyone else did, because I wanted to see the pyramids and I wanted to see Karnak and I wanted to see all that. And it was wonderful and I love that stuff. But for me, I find the more modern history of Egypt equally fascinating. And 1919 was a watershed year because during World War I, the British had already had a protectorate in Egypt, although technically the Ottoman Empire was still owned Egypt as a province, although in reality it wasn't. And when those two nations ended up on opposite sides of World War I, the mask fell. Britain declared Egypt an official protectorate, kicked out all the Turks, had quite a lot of battles in the Sinai and everything, and eventually defeated the Ottoman Turks. During that time, they drafted a million men into the Egyptian Labor Corps to help with the Sinai and Palestine campaigns and sent a lot of them to Flanders. These poor Egyptian fellahin that had never been outside their village were suddenly in rainy Belgium getting shelled by the Germans. And to sweeten this deal, I mean, they were paid, but they didn't have a say in this. To sweeten the deal with the powers that be in Egypt, they said, oh, well, you'll have a seat at the table in the peace conference. And they sort of made vague noises about independence. Well, 1918 rolled around, the Treaty of Versailles happened, and the Egyptians weren't invited. So the Egyptians got, understandably upset about this. And so in 1919, when my first book takes place, there was a wave of independence protests that took over the country. Some turned violent. The British cracked down. Then it went sort of tit for tat, and then it calmed down. But the independence movement simmered until 1922, when they finally were granted limited independence. So my series starts in 1919, just as all that's kicking off. I've been writing book 7 now, which is in 1921. By book 9 or so, independence is actually going to get granted. So things are going to change for Egypt and for my characters throughout the whole series.
That's so interesting. I love that your series is spanning those years through that period. And actually, I suppose, how do you manage to intertwine your story with those events without it actually being directly about those events? Because they're half mystery, they're half adventure in their own right, aren't they? While the events are the backdrop.
Yeah, part of how I do it is that I have 3 different main characters. One is a English World War I veteran who suffers from PTSD, even though they didn't have those terms back then, and has moved to Cairo. He hates Europe. He wants to get away from it. Opens up an antiquities shop. His assistant is a Sudanese scholar and is sort of iffy about independence at first, but that changes as the books develop. And he has some problems in the sense that he's a scholar. He has the superpower I always wanted, which is he speaks multiple languages. And he can read hieroglyphics like you and I can read the newspaper. But he can't really break into the scholarly world in an English-dominated colony. There's also a level of racism of Egyptians against Sudanese. So he has that double layer. So he wants independence for the Sudan and Egypt, but at the same time, his job relies on the British being there. So it's tricky. And then the third character is a Egyptian street urchin, a homeless kid, who is not really interested in independence. He just wants to eat, and he gets caught up in all these adventures too. So I use all these different perspectives to look at the same events. And I've always been fascinated with that as a writer and as a reader, how one event can be looked at from many different ways. And none of those perspectives is wrong. They're just integral to that person.
I get that completely. I can see that in the way that you've written it. And I love that because it's also sort of showing the plight of characters who are underrepresented in stories like the ones we write, aren't they? These are people who aren't really featured in main character roles in stories like that.
Yeah, and you see this to this day. I have Sudanese friends who live in Egypt, and they still, in 2025, experience some racism. And I've done some charitable work with homeless kids in Cairo and in Asyut. So I've dealt with that as well. And there's quite a lot of them, unfortunately. What I find interesting about those homeless kids is they have their own sort of esprit de corps. Many, many times, some shabby little kid, 10-year-old with no shoes will come up and I'll give him a coin or I'll give him like an orange or something. And then I'll see him run off to his buddy and then divide the orange or divide the money. And it's remarkable and it's very humbling when you see that.
It is. I can imagine that. I like that as I think we've lost something, but that's a different conversation for a different day, certainly. So your books now are within the sort of roaring 20s. This is the height of Egyptology from a European perspective, certainly. King Tut's tomb, the British Museum, All of these sorts of things were absolutely in vogue during that period. What was sort of happening in archaeology prior to that then, during the war periods and during the 1919 time that you write that first book in?
Yeah, well, archaeology took a bit of a hiatus during the war, but came back strong afterwards. And it was sort of a golden age for Egyptology because Champollion had deciphered the Rosetta Stone in 1822. That was a long time ago. But it took a while to fully decipher the Egyptian language because not every Egyptian word was on the Rosetta Stone. So he had to work from that, and various Egyptologists spent entire careers figuring out more words, more phrases, and how things changed over time. But by the time my book starts, they had a really good handle on the ancient Egyptian language. That was opening up all the literature, all this papyrus was being discovered. There were excavations. The British had a lot of excavations, but so did the French, the Germans, the Spanish, even the Czechs. The Czechs are remarkable. They really punch above their weight when it comes to archaeology in Egypt. They've been digging there for more than a century. Little country, but a lot of research. And so a lot was being discovered. A lot of tombs were being opened. Howard Carter was searching for King Tut, while most of his contemporaries said, oh, you're a really good draftsman. You should just be drawing pictures of the temples that we're digging up. You shouldn't be wasting your time trying to find a tomb that is obviously not there. There was a huge amount of excavations, and my Sudanese character basically grows up working in these excavations. And that's interesting that there was a fight even then over whose past it was, because you had these foreign archaeologists who were running the digs and had the money to run the digs and the organization. But the regular diggers and all the foremen, the people who were actually making the discoveries, they were all Egyptian or Sudanese. Some of these foremen were just as knowledgeable as the dig directors, and they were becoming researchers themselves, but they were having a hard time getting into the universities. It was just beginning to change when my book takes place. You were beginning to get recognized Egyptian scholars, but it was still an uphill battle.
It's interesting to see that. Yeah, because it's the Howard Carters that are the ones that are quite often remembered, aren't they? Less so the diggers and the local knowledge that's allowed that to happen.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever been to the Flinders Petrie Museum of Egyptology at University College London, but they did a really good thing. They have in their display cases, each display case has a photo of one of the dig foremen. Some like old black and white photo, a lot of these from like the 20s or the 30s or something, next to objects they discovered. So giving those people their names and faces back and saying, oh, well, yeah, Flinders Petrie did this excavation, but, Hamza Yusuf was the one who found this pot.
I'm going to look that up and go there next time I'm in London, because that sounds great.
Oh, it's a brilliant museum. Yeah, it's wonderful.
So where there's archaeology, there tends to be a dark side of that, which I certainly play on in my books, and I know you do as well. How widespread was the sort of smuggling of these artifacts, or the replication, or the illegal distribution of these artifacts in Egypt and around that time? And do you know who the major players were, and sort of how did you work that into your story?
Well, there was a fair amount of smuggling. I don't have any names for you as far as what people were actually doing that, but there were families that specialized in falsifying artifacts, creating artifacts. And as I have that Egyptian-Turkish couple who are faking artifacts, because Sir Augustus, my antiquities dealer, only sells real artifacts to people who actually show a knowledge of Egyptology, and then he just sells the fakes to the tourists. So there was a lot of that going on because there was a demand. People would pay for it, and the Egyptians got good enough to be able to falsify these objects fairly easily. Now, papyrus is a little difficult because it's pretty obvious if something's modern on papyrus. But a shabti or a sculpture or something like that, or a piece of a frieze, that's fairly easy to make because the Egyptians are excellent craftsmen. You make it, beat it up, make it look old, and then sell it on the market. And that's still happening today.
I can imagine entrepreneurial spirit, at work right there.
Yeah. I've actually been offered artifacts on a number of occasions, and I looked at them, and sometimes I could tell they were fake, and sometimes I couldn't. And so, this might be fake or it's stolen. Either way, I don't want it.
So it has to have some kind of provenance or some kind of certificate to say this is where it came from. And all.
Yeah, it's also hugely illegal to buy that stuff, and I would be kicked out of the country.
I see. Yeah, of course, because those things need
Yeah,
to be looked after, don't
of
they, in a
course. Yeah.
certain way? So talking about your archaeological background, because it's great to talk to someone who is an actual archaeologist. My books have a lot of, in inverted commas, archaeology in them. They look for old things and go to archaeological places, but we don't worry about the technical bits too much. How did your real world experience shape the way you wrote about this? And did you have to be careful not to get too technical?
Getting too technical is always a temptation. And also, one tricky thing was casting my mind back to the archaeological techniques of the 19 teens, 1920s, which are very different from what they are now. So I actually looked at archaeology training manuals from 100 years ago to see what they learned and how they did things. Because when I was coming up in the 90s, we were already getting the beginnings of ground penetrating radar and carbon 14 dating and all this other stuff that didn't exist back then. But I worked in Israel, I worked in Cyprus and Bulgaria. I worked all over the United States, a lot in Illinois and Arizona. So yeah, I never dug in Egypt though, which is too bad. But I've worked in a lot of different places, and it never stops being fascinating. Because with every scrape of the trowel, you're bringing up more of the past, more of the past. And to see that when I was digging in Bulgaria, we were doing a Bronze Age village, and just to see that slowly come out, all the foundations of the stone buildings and everything. And that was an interesting dig because there were so many layers to it. We were digging this obviously artificial mound on top of a steep hill at the curve of the Struma River. And the Struma River runs from Bulgaria down into Greece. And we had heard that it was a Roman tomb. That was the local thing, that it was a Roman tomb. So we thought we were going to dig a Roman tomb. We start digging in, and we go through a layer of half a meter of just black ash. Like, we were just covered in this stuff. What's going on here? What's this? Because it's right on this top, just under the grass. And we asked around. It turned out that dated. It was a beacon dating from the Balkan Wars in 1911 to 13 to warn if the enemy was coming up the river valley. So we got through that. Then we found the Roman burials, but there weren't very many of them. But there was still a bunch of mound left. So we're like, are there more Roman burials underneath this? And we started digging down, and we found a very well-preserved Bronze Age village with stone foundations, a lot of pottery, a lot of other artifacts. And it was brilliant, to have all those layers of all that history from something that's almost within living memory to a village whose name and inhabitants no one can remember.
It must be beautiful to reconstruct that, because I suppose to a normal person, a layman, what you've got is a bit of rock and a bit of this and a bit of that and whatever. But to you, because of your experience, you can put a narrative into that, and you can put it together and make it important and make it count for something, I suppose.
Yeah, and it was a lot of fun, and you have these sort of aha moments. I for Mustafa, the Sudanese scholar, I kind of used some of my early archaeological experience with him, not the specific details, because he started out digging in the Sudan. I've never dug in the Sudan, but just those aha moments. He starts out as just a regular digger at age 16. He does it because it makes him money. He's just a village kid. He doesn't know anything about the past. And he discovers a statue of King Taharka, and this was from the 25th Nubian dynasty that came up and conquered Egypt and took over. And he's like, what's this? And it's like, it's a statue, it's a person. And he's like, oh, so is this Egyptian? And the dig director's like, no, he was Sudanese. And they invaded and took over Egypt. And the 16-year-old kid is like, but Egypt always beats us in wars. It's like, no, not that time. And he's like, oh, wow. And that brings up his interest. And then his various patrons realize that he's got a sharp mind and can learn languages quickly. And so he becomes an assistant, works his way up, moves to Egypt to do more digs. That's when my three main characters meet. He's a foreman on an excavation in the Giza Plateau.
And I did enjoy meeting him when I read The Masked Man of Cairo. The first one is called The Purloined Pyramid, isn't it?
Yes, The Case of the Purloined Pyramid.
So talking about adventure stories then, What stories, whether they were books or movies or legends or the sort of campfire stories that we tell each other as children, what sort of stories was it that sparked your imagination and your want to both go into archaeology as a career and then come and write about it in the fiction world afterwards?
Well, I inhaled archaeology as a kid. I love that stuff. I'm Canadian and I grew up in Toronto. And I remember going as a kid to the Royal Ontario Museum, and they had this mummy there that was half unwrapped, like unwrapped down to the chest. And it's all like desiccated and his mouth is open. It's like, ah. And they had the mummy in this glass case at child's eye level. They had obviously done this on purpose. So you go up and you're face to face with this nobleman from 3,000 years ago. And it scared the hell out of me every time I saw this thing, because it's this dead body and it's all dried up. But I had to go see it every time. So that was an early spark. I really got into mythology. I loved the Norse sagas and the prose and poetic Eddas. I liked all the Greek and Roman stuff, the Egyptian stuff too, of course. But I also read in the 80s when I was in high school, there was that big boom in fantasy literature. So I was reading a lot of that as well. I read Ursula Le Guin's Earthsea trilogy several times. For some reason, that became my final exam series. I would read the trilogy every time I had final exams from middle school all through high school. So I think I read the trilogy 7 times.
Fascinating stuff. I love to hear that, and it's nice to hear the stories that inspired you, as well as that gruesome mummy in the museum.
I hope it's still there.
I'd hope so. It survived several thousand years, so
yeah. I hope they still have it at kid level too.
That was a nice touch. I wonder if they realised that they'd inspired your life into it.
Well, they definitely put it at that level on purpose. That was definitely planned.
Sean, that was absolutely fantastic. Tell us where we can find you and your books online.
The name's Sean McLachlan, SeanMcLachlan. So you can go to seanmclachlan.net or hit me up on Amazon. The Masked Man of Cairo series is the series we're talking about there, but I have other mystery series. I have one set in Tangier. I have one set in Weimar, Berlin, and a bunch of other books. So you can go to seanmclachlan.net, or I'm on Instagram and Facebook as Writer Sean. Just writer and SEAN. And my Facebook group is pretty active, and I post photos from my travels all the time.
Sean, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.
This is the Adventure Story Podcast. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. It's been great to spend some time with you. If you've enjoyed the show, please subscribe, please like, and please share. It'll take you just seconds, but really helps me spread the word about the show and what we're talking about. If you have a story you'd like me to explore, then let me know in the comments or via email, hello@lukerichardsonauthor.com. And if you need some more adventure in your life, and let's be honest, who doesn't? You might like to join the Adventure Society. This weekly newsletter is your ticket to travel with me, share real-world adventures, and find out when a new story or a new season of this podcast drops. Head to lukerichardsonauthor.com/Adventure Society right now to join for free. A special thanks to my patrons who make creating in different ways like this possible. All my books and my podcasts are dedicated to you. You keep me motivated when times get tough and focused when something else threatens to steal my attention, which happens quite a lot. Many of you have been supporting me since the very early days, and for that I'm incredibly grateful. If you'd like to support me and my various creations, consider joining the crew on Patreon. You'll get free early access to my books, commercial-free direct downloads of this podcast, and more fun stuff as I invent it. lukerichardsonauthor.com/Patreon, Patreon, is where you need to go. And if you're a fan of adventure stories, of course, like the one that I've told today, check out my books, lukerichardsonauthor.com. Bon voyage, enjoy the adventure, and I can't wait to see you again soon.